of dates. The Muslim Brotherhood, the organization of Muslim Brotherhood, was founded in a special context who had nothing to see with the creation of Israel and nothing to see with the reaction of Israel state, because Israel state didn't exist. And the main enemy that we can see mentioned in the chart of the Hamas, for instance, and in all the ideology of Muslim Brotherhood, or this kind of Muslims, their enemy, the enemy they mention before Israel, is the enemy of the international plot against Islam. And one of the main enemies they mention is Atatürk, someone interesting for you because we are in an island with concerned by Turkish history. And Atatürk, the one who wanted to destroy the caliphate and abolish the caliphate, is the first and the main enemy of all those people who come from the Muslim Brotherhood background and ideology. And I think, of course, it doesn't solve the problem we want to face now. It doesn't justify any kind of things that could make Israel, of course, I'm sure of it. And I know it's obvious, and we all know this, but it's important to mention that the main enemy of the Muslims are the Muslims, and the main enemies of the Arabs are the Arabs. And the problem of Jerusalem and the problem of the Israeli conflict, one other enemy is also the mediatization. We don't mention in France, because in our Institute of Geopolitics we analyze representations were the main important concept for us, representations of the both sides. And no conflict is so spread, so mentioned, so mediatized as the Israeli-Arab conflict. And we should wonder why. And in this strategy of the Hamas, I come back to the Hamas, not only Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, not only the Muslim Brotherhood, but Islamic revivalism. And you were right to say not only Sunni, even Shia. I think this trap is becoming more and more precise against the Arab themselves and the Palestinians themselves when we analyze the strategy of Iran. The strategy of Iran nowadays is to use the fanatization, the extremist, impressive fanatization of this conflict, and the fact that we were in a conflict between Arabs and Israelis, or Arabs and Jews. And now we are facing the fact that the conflict has become, for many people and for many representation, a religious conflict. And Iran, who is not Arab and not Sunni, was quite clever. They invented the checks, and they are a very intelligent strategy. They know that this Israeli-Arab conflict has become the main concept of all the dictators, Muslim dictators, Arab dictators, to hide their domestic problems, their domestic responsibilities, and those who most mention this Arab-Israeli conflict are the first who were the enemies, and the traditional enemies of the Palestinians, traditional enemies of the nationalists in Palestine, who are Islamists, because the logic of Islamist movement is an anti-national movement, like says Khomeini, but like says also the charter of the Hamas, and like says any normal Islamist believer who has the Islamic background. The nationalism is a shame, is a sin, is something which must be condemned. Then, for this reason, Islamism is the first enemy of national Palestinism. And Shia strategy of Iran is the strategy of having the atomic bomb in order to increase the dimension of Iran against its neighbors who are Sunni or Arabs. And this strategy, religious strategy of instrumentalizing the Israeli-Arab conflict has become a trap for the Arabs and the Palestinians, as we saw when I made a report during the 2006 war. It was very interesting when I saw some Palestinian people who are Israeli citizens and who are happy to see the strategy of the Hezbollah and of the Iran. And when Muslim League wanted to condemn the pro-Iranian Hezbollah strategy, but it has a big problem. The street, what the so-called Arab street, I don't believe in, but the so-called Arab street didn't agree with the Arab strategy of the Muslim Arab states, the member of the Muslim League. And the strategy of Iran was very interesting. This conflict has become a religious conflict. They used this dimension to hide the real reason of the atomic bomb of Iran, who will be a bomb against Arab and Sunni states, and they hide it, making believe that they are the only defenders and protectors of Palestinian and Arab nationalism. Well, I know that you all know this. Why do we say this in France? Because in France, and I will conclude, we are very criticized in all the world for having created the secularity, the laiknik, like say the Turks, laiknik, the secular thinking, the fact of building a diplomacy on secular, and even if our President Sarkozy recently said a very nice thing about the Islam in Saudi Arabia that we don't all share, because when he said that Saudi Arabia is the modernity of Islam and the reconciliation between Islam and modernity and tolerance, we don't all share our dear president, even if we like something that he did. But even if this president is little changing, is making a little revolution, it's still something that is very important for us. We are sure that the main solution is not making pragmatic proposition that no one wants. The problem is the hatred. The lessons, the teaching of the hatred are so far so strong that even in our suburbs, a Jew or an Arab are thinking like in some Arab countries or in Palestinian zones where people are fighting. Some people, only because they are Jew, they can be aggressed in the street because they are accused to be Nazi Israeli, because now we mix things, with the presentation, you are a Nazi Israeli because you are a Jew, and you are in the street with something that reminds you are a Jew that you must be killed. We face things, something like this in all the world. The lesson of the hatred, the teaching of the hatred, thanks to the religion and the use of religion, and the fact that we transform a Palestinian-Israeli conflict into a clash of civilization conflict and religious conflict, the main, I know it's easy to say this, and it's not pragmatic, it's not precise, I don't mention something concrete, but we cannot do anything. There will never be any peace as soon as the one I interviewed, Mr. Lieberman, for instance, he told me, Aravim Mechabelim, as soon as we have Arab citizens in our country, we will have terrorists. And as soon as on the other side, some people say that they are evil, you know that in the Palestinian TV, in some Arab TVs, in some Muslim countries, in the public television, we see the whole story of the protocol of the Wise of Zion, which is mentioned in the charter of the Hamas, the fact that the children, they are killed by Jews who want to eat their body and to drink their blood. This kind of old, stupid and fanatic representation are not only stupid, it can make laugh some people, but it's something which is increasing. We never observed such an important teaching of hatred, and we know by the story that the teaching of hatred cannot allow any kind of peace. Then what can we do against this teaching of hatred who is mentioned by religious rhetoric and religious text? We must come to more rationality, and we must come back to a secular mind, a secular vision of the world, and we must face it even not only in France or here, but even in the United Nations. Now we can face this problem in the United Nations. I really conclude, in the United Nations, the Muslim states now want to introduce some legislation and some proposition. We fight against this with the Humanist International Organization. They want to introduce legislation in all the countries of the world. We can permit people prohibit any criticism of religions. It's something very important and it's very grave, because it's linked to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. There is a will in all the world, but even in the United Nations, to make people return to the Middle Age mentality, that we will not able to criticize any text because it's a religious text. And it's the reason why people don't want to make peace in Israel, because for the Jews, Jerusalem, Yerushalayim, is not only the third place for the religion, symbolic place, it's the only one. And since years and years, people say we will return to Jerusalem. And now, the mediatization, even the Western countries, even at the United Nations, and all the TV of the world and the parties of the world, they spread this thinking that in Israel, Jews want to avoid Muslims to benefit to their Holy Land. I think the only solution is not concrete, but it's a long-run solution to come back to secularity. Thank you.
Thank you very much.